The morning sun cast long shadows across the military training compound as Sarah Martinez laced up her combat boots for what she didn't know would be the most defining day of her life. At 24, she had already endured 18 months of relentless military training, each day bringing new challenges that seemed designed to break her spirit. But Sarah had something her instructors hadn't counted on: a determination forged in the steel mills of Pittsburgh, where her father had worked double shifts to keep their family afloat. Colonel James Morrison watched from his office window as the recruits assembled in the courtyard below. His weathered face, marked by 30 years of military service, showed no emotion as his eyes settled on Martinez. She was different from the others, he had noticed that from day one. While her male counterparts relied on brute strength, she used strategy and endurance. While they complained about the harsh conditions, she adapted and persevered. It bothered him in ways he couldn't quite articulate. Morrison had built his reputation on breaking down recruits and rebuilding them into soldiers. His methods were harsh but effective, earning him respect throughout the military hierarchy. He believed that women had no place in combat roles, a conviction that had only hardened over the years. When the military began integrating female soldiers into more challenging programs, Morrison saw it as political correctness gone wrong. He was determined to prove his point, and Martinez had become his primary target. The training ground that morning was set up for the quarterly endurance challenge, a grueling obstacle course that combined physical strength, mental acuity, and strategic thinking. The course stretched over 15 miles of rugged terrain, including rope climbs, mud crawls, weapon assembly stations, and tactical problem-solving scenarios. Most recruits took between 8 and 12 hours to complete it, with many failing to finish at all. Sarah arrived early, as was her habit, spending the extra time visualizing each obstacle and planning her approach. She had learned this technique from her older brother Miguel, who had served 3 tours in Afghanistan before an IED explosion ended his military career. Miguel had taught her that the mind was the most powerful weapon a soldier could possess, and she had taken that lesson to heart. As the other recruits gathered, Sarah noticed the way some of them looked at her, a mixture of skepticism and curiosity. She had proven herself capable time and again, but there were still those who viewed her presence as a disruption to tradition. Among them was Jake Harrison, a recruit from Texas whose father and grandfather had both been career military men. Jake had made no secret of his belief that women weakened the military's effectiveness. "Today's challenge will separate the wheat from the chaff," Colonel Morrison announced, his voice carrying across the assembled group. "This course has been designed to test not just your physical capabilities, but your mental resilience and tactical thinking. Some of you will succeed. Many of you will not. Those who fail will find themselves reconsidering their military careers." His eyes lingered on Sarah as he spoke these words, and she felt the familiar tightening in her chest that came whenever Morrison singled her out. Over the past months, he had subjected her to additional challenges, extended training sessions, and criticism that bordered on harassment. Each time, she had risen to meet his expectations, which seemed only to frustrate him further. The recruits were divided into groups of 5, each assigned a different starting time to prevent crowding on the course. Sarah found herself grouped with Jake Harrison, Maria Santos from California, David Chun from New York, and Tommy Williams from Georgia. It was an interesting mix: Harrison openly hostile, Santos supportive but cautious, Chun focused and analytical, and Williams generally indifferent to gender politics but committed to team success. As they prepared for their 10 a.m. start time, Sarah reviewed her mental checklist. She had studied the course layout, identified potential shortcuts and problem areas, and prepared contingency plans for various scenarios. Her backpack contained the regulation equipment plus a few personal items her brother had suggested: extra bootlaces, medical tape, and energy bars that wouldn't show up on standard gear checks. Morrison approached their group, clipboard in hand. "Harrison, you'll be team leader for this exercise," he announced, deliberately bypassing Sarah despite her superior performance in previous leadership assessments. "Your objective is to complete the course as a unit. All 5 members must finish, or the entire team fails." This was a new wrinkle that hadn't been mentioned in the briefing. Sarah exchanged glances with the others, recognizing the additional pressure this created. It wasn't enough for her to excel individually, she now had to ensure the success of teammates who might not share her commitment or capabilities. The first obstacle was a 15-foot wall climb with limited handholds. Standard procedure called for the strongest team members to go first and assist the others, but Harrison immediately ordered Sarah to go last. "We need to make sure the real soldiers get over first," he said with obvious disdain. Sarah bit back her response, knowing that arguing would only prove Morrison's point about women being disruptive. Instead, she helped boost Chen and Williams over the wall, then scrambled up using a technique Miguel had taught her that relied on momentum rather than pure upper body strength. She was over in half the time it had taken the others. The second obstacle was a 100-yard low crawl through mud and barbed wire. Here, Sarah's smaller size became an advantage, allowing her to move more quickly and efficiently than her larger teammates. She finished first but waited at the end to help pull the others through when they got stuck or tangled. As they progressed through the course, a pattern emerged. Harrison continued to underestimate Sarah's abilities and make tactical decisions based on his prejudices rather than optimal strategy. Sarah compensated by quietly supporting weaker team members and finding ways to maximize their collective efficiency without directly challenging Harrison's authority. The third major obstacle was a rope bridge crossing over a 40-foot ravine. The bridge was intentionally unstable, designed to test balance and nerve. Chen, who had revealed a fear of heights during earlier training, froze halfway across. The entire team was stuck, with Chen unable to move forward or back, and a growing line of other teams waiting behind them. Harrison's response was to shout orders and threats, which only made Chen more paralyzed. Sarah recognized the situation was deteriorating rapidly and knew they needed a different approach. Against regulations, she climbed onto the rope bridge while Chen was still on it, adding dangerous instability but positioning herself to provide physical and emotional support. "Look at me, David," she said calmly, moving slowly toward him. "Remember the breathing technique from stress management training. In for 4 counts, hold for 4, out for 4. We're going to do this together." Working together, Sarah guided Chen across the bridge, talking him through each step and providing physical support when his balance faltered. It took 20 minutes longer than planned, but they all made it across safely. Harrison said nothing, but Sarah could see the grudging respect in his eyes. The fourth obstacle was a tactical problem-solving scenario. Teams were presented with a mock battlefield situation and had to devise a strategy for neutralizing enemy positions while minimizing casualties. They had 30 minutes to plan and 30 minutes to execute using paintball weapons and dummy explosives. This was where Sarah's strategic training really showed. While Harrison focused on direct assault tactics, Sarah identified weaknesses in the enemy setup that could be exploited through coordinated movement and misdirection. She sketched out an alternative plan that would accomplish the mission with fewer risks and better resource utilization. Initially, Harrison dismissed her suggestions, but as they worked through the scenario, even he could see the superiority of her approach. Reluctantly, he incorporated elements of her strategy into their final plan. The execution was flawless, with their team completing the objective faster and more efficiently than any other group that day. By the time they reached the halfway point, Sarah's team was ahead of schedule despite the setbacks. More importantly, the team dynamics had shifted. Chen and Williams were openly following Sarah's tactical suggestions, Santos had become a strong advocate for her leadership abilities, and even Harrison was beginning to defer to her expertise in certain areas. Colonel Morrison had been monitoring their progress through radio reports and closed-circuit cameras positioned throughout the course. Each update brought news of Martinez exceeding expectations, solving problems, and demonstrating leadership qualities that his male-dominated military culture found threatening. His frustration grew with each positive report. The afternoon brought the most challenging portion of the course, a series of obstacles designed to test limits of physical endurance and mental resilience. Teams had to carry a wounded teammate simulation, a 100-pound dummy, for 2 miles across rough terrain, then complete a weapons assembly challenge while under simulated enemy fire, paintball attacks from hidden positions. The heat had become oppressive, with temperatures climbing into the mid-90s. Several recruits from earlier teams had already been pulled from the course due to heat exhaustion. Sarah recognized the danger signs and implemented a rotation system for carrying the dummy, ensuring no one became overheated. She also identified shaded rest areas and water sources that other teams had missed. During the weapons assembly challenge, paintballs flew from concealed positions while teams tried to disassemble, clean, and reassemble their weapons under pressure. The stress was designed to simulate battlefield conditions where equipment maintenance might mean the difference between life and death. Sarah's focus was absolute. Despite paintballs hitting her gear and the dummy ammunition flying around her, she methodically worked through the assembly process, her hands steady and movements precise. She finished her weapon first and, then, helped Williams, whose hands were shaking from stress and exhaustion. Morrison watched this display through binoculars, his jaw tightening with each demonstration of Martinez's competence. He had designed this course to break her, to prove that women couldn't handle the pressures of combat situations. Instead, she was excelling in ways that challenged his fundamental beliefs about military service. The final major obstacle was a night navigation exercise. Teams had to traverse 5 miles of wilderness using only map and compass, locating 3 checkpoints in complete darkness while avoiding roving patrols of instructors trying to capture them. Any team member caught by a patrol resulted in failure for the entire group. Sarah had excelled in navigation training, partly due to childhood camping trips with her father and partly due to intensive study of topographical reading and orienteering techniques. As they entered the darkened forest, she took point despite Harrison's token protest, leading the team through terrain that would have challenged experienced woodsmen. The first checkpoint was located in a dense grove that required careful navigation to avoid the patrol routes Morrison had established. Sarah used techniques Miguel had taught her about moving silently and reading terrain in darkness. She led the team in a wide circle around the obvious approach routes, bringing them to the checkpoint from an unexpected direction. At the second checkpoint, they encountered another team that had become lost and was arguing among themselves. Sarah faced a decision: help competitors who might later surpass them or leave them to fail. Without hesitation, she provided compass bearings that would get them back on track, earning grateful thanks and surprised looks from her own teammates. The final checkpoint was the most challenging, located at the top of a steep ridge that most teams would approach from the easier eastern slope. Sarah recognized that the patrols would be concentrated there and chose instead to lead her team up the more difficult western face, using rock climbing techniques to navigate terrain that instructors assumed was impassable. They reached the final checkpoint at 3 a.m., 12 hours after starting the course. They were the second team to finish, an unprecedented achievement given the setbacks they had encountered. More importantly, they had finished as a cohesive unit, with all members supporting each other throughout the ordeal. As they made their way back to base camp, Harrison walked alongside Sarah in companionable silence. Finally, he spoke. "I was wrong about you, Martinez. Dead wrong. You're not just a good soldier, you're the best natural leader I've seen in this program." Sarah nodded acknowledgement but remained focused on the larger implications. She had proven herself capable, but she knew Morrison would find ways to diminish or dismiss this achievement. The real test wasn't the obstacle course, it was changing minds and attitudes that had been formed over decades of military tradition. Colonel Morrison was waiting for them at the finish line, his expression unreadable. As Sarah approached, she could see the conflict in his eyes, professional respect warring with personal conviction. She had accomplished something that challenged his worldview, and she could see that he wasn't ready to accept what that might mean. "Congratulations, Martinez," he said formally. "Impressive performance." But his tone suggested that this was far from over, that new challenges would be designed to test her in different ways. Sarah understood that winning one battle didn't mean winning the war, and that the most difficult obstacles might still lie ahead. The weeks following Sarah's exceptional performance on the endurance course brought an unexpected shift in the training program's atmosphere. Word of her achievement had spread beyond the immediate unit, reaching the attention of higher-ranking officials who were monitoring the integration of women into combat roles. This visibility created a complex dynamic that Colonel Morrison found increasingly problematic. General Patricia Williams, the first female general to oversee combat training programs, scheduled an unannounced inspection of Morrison's facility. Her reputation preceded her, a decorated veteran who had broken through the military's glass ceiling through exceptional performance and political acuity. She understood better than most the challenges facing women in male-dominated military environments. Morrison received only 12 hours' notice of the inspection, barely enough time to ensure standard protocols were being followed. He suspected that Martinez's performance had triggered this scrutiny, and his resentment deepened. For 30 years, he had operated his training programs with minimal oversight, building a reputation for producing tough, reliable soldiers. Now he felt his methods and philosophies under examination by people who had never faced real combat. Sarah sensed the tension during morning formation when Morrison's announcements were more clipped than usual and his criticism more pointed. She had learned to read the subtle signs of his moods, the way he held his shoulders when frustrated, the particular tone he used when preparing to make someone an example. Today, all those warning signs were present. "Today we begin advanced combat simulation training," Morrison announced. "This program will test your ability to function under extreme stress, make life or death decisions under pressure, and maintain unit cohesion when everything goes wrong. Some of you may find that your previous successes were merely preparation for real challenges." The simulation facility was a sophisticated mock battlefield that could replicate various combat scenarios using live ammunition exercises, pyrotechnics, and computer-controlled opposition forces. It was typically reserved for advanced trainees who had completed at least 2 years of preparation. Morrison's decision to introduce it early was clearly intended to increase pressure on recruits he considered unready. Sarah's team for the simulation included several recruits she hadn't worked with before: Marcus Thompson, a former college football player from Alabama; Lisa Rodriguez, a military police officer seeking combat certification; Kevin Park, a communications specialist; and Robert Tank Jackson, a heavy weapons expert who had served in the National Guard. This was a more experienced group than her previous team, with each member bringing specialized skills. The scenario they were assigned was a hostage rescue mission in an urban environment. Intelligence reports indicated that enemy forces had taken civilian hostages in a multi-story building and were threatening execution if demands weren't met. The team had to infiltrate the building, neutralize the threats, and extract the hostages with minimal casualties. Morrison personally briefed their team, an unusual step that immediately put Sarah on alert. His instructions were detailed and specific, leaving little room for tactical innovation or adaptation. "You will follow the prescribed approach exactly as outlined," he emphasized. "Any deviation from protocol will result in mission failure and disciplinary action." The prescribed approach was a frontal assault that relied heavily on overwhelming firepower and rapid advancement. Sarah could immediately see flaws in this strategy: it increased risks to hostages, ignored potential escape routes, and failed to account for the enemy's ability to reposition. But Morrison's warning about following protocol meant she couldn't voice these concerns without appearing insubordinate. As they prepared for the simulation, Sarah quietly studied the building layout and identified alternative approaches that might be more effective. She noticed service entrances, ventilation systems, and sightlines that could provide tactical advantages. When Thompson asked for her assessment, she shared her observations while emphasizing they would follow Morrison's plan. The simulation began at dawn with their team positioned outside the target building. Computer sensors tracked their movements and responses while hidden speakers provided enemy communications and hostage distress calls. The pressure was immediate and intense, designed to overwhelm rational decision-making and force reliance on training instincts. Following Morrison's protocol, they approached the building's main entrance with Thompson taking point and Jackson providing heavy weapons support. Almost immediately, they encountered heavier resistance than anticipated. The enemy had positioned automated weapons systems that raked their approach route with simulated gunfire. Within minutes, Park was killed by computer calculation, and Rodriguez was wounded severely enough to require evacuation. The prescribed plan was falling apart, but Morrison's radio instructions remained unchanged: continue the frontal assault regardless of casualties. Sarah faced a critical decision. She could follow orders and watch her team get systematically eliminated, or she could adapt the strategy to salvage the mission. Through her headset, she could hear Morrison's voice emphasizing adherence to protocol, but she could also hear the desperation in the simulated hostage voices. "Thompson, we need to modify approach," she said quietly. "The protocol isn't working and we're going to lose everyone." Morrison was clear about following orders, Thompson replied, but his voice carried doubt. He had seen Sarah's tactical abilities and knew she was usually right about these situations. "Sometimes good soldiers have to make hard choices," Sarah responded. "We can follow orders and fail, or adapt and succeed. What do you think the real mission priority is here?" This was the moment that would define not just the simulation, but Sarah's entire military future. She knew that deviating from Morrison's plan would give him grounds for disciplinary action, possibly ending her career. But she also knew that the hostages would die if they continued the failed strategy. Sarah made her choice. Using hand signals, she directed Thompson and Jackson to maintain the frontal assault while she and the wounded Rodriguez circled to the building's rear. She had identified a service entrance that provided access to the building's upper floors, where intelligence suggested the hostages were being held. The rear approach required climbing skills and careful navigation through areas not covered by enemy sensors. Sarah's smaller size and agility proved advantageous as she worked her way up external fire escapes and through partially open windows. Rodriguez, despite her wounds, provided cover and communication support. Inside the building, Sarah encountered a complex layout that required quick decision-making and improvisation. The enemy forces were concentrated on the lower floors, expecting threats from Thompson's frontal assault. The upper floors were less defended but contained traps and surveillance systems that could alert the enemy to her presence. Moving through the building, Sarah demonstrated skills that went beyond standard military training. She disabled security cameras using techniques Miguel had taught her about electronics, navigated through darkened corridors using silent movement skills learned during wilderness survival training, and identified structural weaknesses that could be exploited for rapid movement between floors. The hostages were located on the fourth floor, guarded by two enemy positions that commanded views of all standard approach routes. Sarah positioned herself to observe their patterns and identify moments of vulnerability. She noticed that the guards rotated positions every 15 minutes, creating brief windows when sight lines were compromised. During one of these windows, Sarah moved into position to neutralize the first guard post. The simulation used paintball weapons with computer scoring to determine hits and casualties. Her first shots were precise and effective, eliminating the threat before an alarm could be raised. The second guard position required a more complex approach. Sarah used distraction techniques, creating noise in one direction while attacking from another. The guards responded to the distraction, leaving their primary position momentarily vulnerable. Sarah's assault was swift and decisive, neutralizing the threat while maintaining operational security. With the guards eliminated, Sarah began the hostage extraction. The simulated civilians were played by junior officers who had been instructed to act panicked and uncooperative. Sarah's calm demeanor and clear instructions helped organize them for evacuation while maintaining security against potential counterattacks. The extraction route took them through areas of the building that Sarah had scouted during her initial reconnaissance. She had identified a fire escape route that bypassed the main floors where Thompson's assault was still engaged with heavy enemy resistance. This allowed for hostage evacuation without exposing them to ongoing combat. As they moved through the building, Sarah maintained radio communication with Thompson, coordinating their activities to maximize effectiveness. When Thompson's team encountered particularly heavy resistance, Sarah was able to attack enemy positions from behind, using her elevated position to provide tactical support. The simulation concluded with all hostages successfully extracted and enemy resistance neutralized. Sarah's team had achieved complete mission success with minimal casualties, a result that exceeded expectations for even experienced combat units. The computer scoring system rated their performance as exceptional across all measured categories. But Sarah's moment of triumph was short-lived. As they emerged from the simulation facility, Colonel Morrison was waiting with a disciplinary team and a detailed report of protocol violations. His face was flushed with anger, and his voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to absolute obedience. "Martinez, you deliberately disobeyed direct orders and endangered your team through unauthorized tactical modifications," he announced loud enough for other recruits to hear. This kind of insubordination is exactly why integration policies are failing. You've proven that you cannot function within established military structure. Sarah stood at attention while Morrison delivered his criticism, knowing that any response would only escalate the situation. She had anticipated this confrontation and prepared herself mentally for the consequences. But she had also calculated that mission success would demonstrate the value of tactical flexibility over rigid adherence to flawed protocols. Thompson stepped forward, a move that surprised everyone including Sarah. "Sir, with respect, Martinez's modifications saved the mission and probably saved lives. The original protocol was resulting in systematic team elimination. Her adaptations turned certain failure into complete success. "I didn't ask for your opinion, Thompson," Morrison snapped. "Military effectiveness requires discipline and order, not freelance heroics from soldiers who think they know better than their commanding officers." But Thompson's intervention had opened the door for others. Rodriguez, despite her simulated wounds, spoke up. "Sir, Martinez's tactical awareness and leadership prevented mission failure. Her ability to adapt under pressure is exactly what we need in real combat situations." Morrison's anger was now directed at the entire team, but Sarah could see something else in his expression: uncertainty. The simulation results were undeniable, and questioning them would require him to argue that mission failure was preferable to protocol violation. This was a position that would be difficult to defend to higher authorities. General Williams chose this moment to make her appearance. She had been observing the simulation from the control room and had witnessed both Sarah's tactical innovations and Morrison's reaction. Her expression was neutral, but Sarah could sense the sharp intelligence evaluating everything she saw. "Colonel Morrison, I'd like to review the simulation results and debriefing procedures," Williams said calmly. "It appears there are some interesting tactical developments worth discussing." Morrison's position became increasingly uncomfortable as Williams examined the computer data and interviewed team members about their experience. The objective measures all supported Sarah's decision-making and demonstrated the superiority of adaptive tactics over rigid protocol adherence. Williams spent particular time questioning Sarah about her thought processes and tactical reasoning. "Walk me through your decision to modify the approach strategy," she said. "What factors influenced your assessment that protocol changes were necessary?" Sarah's response was measured and professional, focusing on tactical analysis rather than personal vindication. She outlined the intelligence gathered during initial reconnaissance, the unexpected enemy resistance that invalidated original assumptions, and the risk assessment that led to her strategic modifications. Her explanation demonstrated sophisticated military thinking and situational awareness. The debriefing continued for over an hour, with Williams probing various aspects of the simulation and team performance. Morrison's criticism seemed increasingly weak when compared to the objective evidence of mission success and tactical effectiveness. Other team members consistently supported Sarah's leadership and decision-making abilities. When the debriefing concluded, Williams announced that she would be conducting additional evaluations over the following weeks. "Military effectiveness requires both discipline and adaptability," she said, looking directly at Morrison. "Our role is to identify and develop soldiers who can excel in complex, dynamic environments where rigid protocols may not always apply." Sarah understood that this was far from over. Morrison's hostility had been publicly challenged, which would likely intensify his efforts to discredit her. Williams' support provided some protection, but it also made her a target for those who opposed integration policies. The real test would be whether she could continue performing at exceptional levels while navigating increasingly complex political pressures. That evening, as Sarah reflected on the day's events, she realized that her military career had reached a turning point. She was no longer just proving that women could succeed in combat roles, she was challenging fundamental assumptions about leadership, tactical thinking, and military effectiveness. The stakes had escalated beyond her personal success to broader questions about the military's future direction. Morrison spent that same evening reviewing Sarah's personnel file and planning his next moves. He remained convinced that her success was an anomaly that would ultimately prove his point about women in combat. But, for the first time, he was beginning to doubt whether his traditional methods would be sufficient to achieve his objectives. General Williams' extended evaluation period brought unprecedented scrutiny to Morrison's training program. Teams of observers arrived weekly to assess various aspects of recruit development, with particular attention to leadership emergence and tactical innovation. This oversight created an environment where Morrison felt his authority constantly questioned and his methods continuously examined. The pressure was affecting Morrison in ways his subordinates had never seen before. His usually immaculate appearance showed signs of strain, uniform slightly wrinkled, boots less perfectly polished, and a nervous habit of checking his watch that suggested internal stress. Staff members noticed him working late into the evening, reviewing training protocols and performance evaluations with obsessive attention to detail. Sarah's position during this period was equally challenging but in different ways. She had become a symbol for women's integration into combat roles, with media attention that extended far beyond the military base. Reporters requested interviews, women's advocacy groups cited her achievements, and political figures used her success to support policy changes. This visibility was flattering but also created enormous pressure to maintain perfect performance. The other recruits' reactions to Sarah's prominence varied considerably. Some, like Thompson and Rodriguez, had become genuine allies who respected her abilities and supported her leadership. Others resented the attention she received and the way her success seemed to overshadow their own achievements. A few remained overtly hostile, viewing her presence as a threat to military traditions they valued. Morrison's response to the ongoing evaluation was to design increasingly complex training scenarios that would test Sarah's limits and expose what he believed were inevitable weaknesses. He consulted with combat veterans, reviewed historical battle analyses, and collaborated with military psychologists to create situations that would challenge not just physical and tactical capabilities, but emotional resilience and psychological stability. The culminating exercise was announced as a week-long survival and combat simulation that would take place in a remote wilderness area. Teams would be dropped into hostile territory with minimal equipment and tasked with reaching an extraction point while evading enemy forces and completing intelligence-gathering missions. The scenario was designed to replicate the most challenging conditions that combat soldiers might encounter. Sarah's team for this exercise included both allies and potential antagonists. Thompson and Rodriguez were assigned, providing familiar support, but Morrison also included Derek Stevens, a recruit who had consistently questioned women's place in combat roles, and Amanda Walsh, another female recruit whose competitive relationship with Sarah had created tension between them. The fifth team member was Carlos Mendez, a quiet but capable soldier whose loyalty remained uncertain. The briefing for the exercise was extensive and ominous. Teams would be operating in mountainous terrain during winter conditions, with temperatures expected to drop below freezing at night. They would carry basic survival gear, limited food supplies, and training weapons loaded with paintball ammunition for combat scenarios. Enemy forces would be played by special operations soldiers who would use all available tactics to prevent mission completion. Morrison's personal briefing to Sarah's team was particularly detailed, almost as if he wanted to ensure they understood the full scope of challenges they would face. This exercise has a 40% failure rate under normal conditions, he informed them. Teams that fail to reach extraction points face additional training requirements and potential removal from the program. There will be no allowances made for physical limitations or gender-based accommodations. The insertion began before dawn, with teams being dropped at different locations throughout the mountain range. Sarah's team found themselves on a steep hillside covered with snow and ice, with visibility limited by early morning fog. Their first challenge was basic orientation, determining their location and plotting a route to the extraction point 20 miles away through treacherous terrain. Sarah took charge of navigation, using map and compass skills that had served her well in previous exercises. But the mountainous environment presented complications she hadn't encountered before. Magnetic declination was different at this altitude, weather patterns could change rapidly, and the terrain offered both opportunities and serious hazards. Stevens immediately challenged her leadership, arguing that physical demands of mountain travel required male leadership and that Sarah's smaller size would handicap the entire team. "We need someone who can carry their share of equipment and maintain pace over difficult terrain," he said, speaking loudly enough for the entire team to hear. Sarah's response was measured but firm. Leadership effectiveness isn't determined by physical size, and this mission requires tactical thinking more than pure strength. I suggest we focus on working together rather than arguing about command structure. Walsh's reaction was more complicated. As the other woman on the team, she faced pressure to either support Sarah's leadership or distance herself to avoid being seen as promoting gender solidarity over military effectiveness. Her decision to remain neutral rather than openly supporting Sarah created an additional dynamic that complicated team cohesion. The first day's travel took them through terrain that challenged everyone's capabilities. Snow-covered slopes required careful navigation to avoid avalanche risks, stream crossings demanded rope work and team coordination, and the altitude affected everyone's endurance. Sarah's mountain climbing experience, gained during childhood camping trips and subsequent civilian training, proved invaluable for route planning and safety management. By evening, they had covered 8 miles and established a defensive camp position that provided shelter and security. Sarah organized watch rotations and equipment management while ensuring that all team members remained warm and fed. Her attention to these details impressed even Stevens, who had expected her to focus solely on the dramatic aspects of leadership while neglecting practical necessities. The second day brought their first encounter with enemy forces. A patrol of special operations soldiers detected their movement and initiated a pursuit that lasted several hours. Sarah's response demonstrated tactical thinking that impressed her teammates and frustrated their pursuers. Instead of trying to outrun superior forces, she led the team through terrain that negated the enemy's advantages while creating opportunities for ambush and misdirection. The chase culminated in a running battle through dense forest where Sarah's team used coordinated movement and communication to confuse their pursuers and ultimately escape. Stevens, who had been skeptical about Sarah's combat leadership, found himself following her tactical directions instinctively and acknowledged afterward that her strategies had saved the mission. On the third day, they encountered another team that had been compromised by enemy forces and was requesting assistance. Sarah faced a critical decision: help competitors who might later surpass them, or maintain mission focus and leave them to their fate. The military value being tested here was loyalty versus strategic thinking, and there was no clearly correct answer. Sarah chose to provide assistance, but in a way that maintained her team's mission security. They shared water and medical supplies with the compromised team while providing tactical advice for evading pursuit. This decision cost them several hours but demonstrated leadership values that impressed even Walsh, who had been questioning Sarah's commitment to team success over personal achievement. The fourth day brought the most challenging test yet, a complex intelligence-gathering mission that required infiltrating an enemy installation and retrieving specific information without being detected. The installation was a sophisticated mock facility with electronic surveillance, motion detectors, and roving patrols that made discovery highly likely. Sarah's approach to this challenge drew on skills that went far beyond standard military training. She had studied electronic surveillance systems as part of her civilian education in computer science, and she understood how to identify vulnerabilities and exploit weaknesses in security networks. Her plan involved disabling specific sensors while creating false signals that would misdirect enemy attention. The infiltration required each team member to perform specialized tasks that maximized their individual capabilities while supporting overall mission objectives. Stevens used his size and strength to access difficult positions, Rodriguez employed her military police training for security assessment, Walsh contributed communications expertise, and Mendez provided technical support for electronic countermeasures. Sarah's role was to coordinate these individual efforts into a cohesive operation while adapting to unexpected complications. When a patrol schedule change threatened to compromise their approach, she quickly modified the plan while maintaining communication with all team members. When electronic countermeasures proved more complex than anticipated, she improvised solutions that drew on theoretical knowledge rather than standard procedures. The mission succeeded completely, with all required intelligence gathered and the team extracting without detection. But, more importantly, the experience had transformed team dynamics in ways that surprised everyone involved. Stevens had moved from open hostility to grudging respect, Walsh had begun actively supporting Sarah's leadership decisions, and even Mendez had started contributing tactical suggestions rather than simply following orders. Morrison, who was monitoring the exercise from the command center, watched these developments with growing frustration. Each success that Sarah achieved seemed to validate the integration policies he opposed and undermine the arguments he had spent years developing. The objective measures of performance were undeniable, but he remained convinced that Sarah's success was somehow artificial or unsustainable. The fifth day brought the final challenge, reaching the extraction point while evading a concentrated effort by enemy forces to prevent mission completion. Intelligence reports indicated that opposing forces had identified the extraction location and were positioning assets to intercept any approaching teams. Sarah's team would need to navigate through prepared defensive positions while maintaining operational security and meeting strict timing requirements. Sarah's analysis of the situation revealed that conventional approaches to the extraction point were heavily defended and likely to result in team capture or elimination. The enemy had positioned forces along obvious routes and established observation posts that commanded views of the surrounding terrain. Any direct approach would result in immediate detection and overwhelming response. Her solution was characteristically unconventional but tactically sound. Instead of approaching the extraction point directly, she led the team on a wide flanking movement that took them through terrain the enemy had dismissed as impassable. This route required technical climbing skills, careful navigation through unstable areas, and precise timing to reach the extraction point during a narrow window of opportunity. The flanking movement was physically demanding and technically complex, requiring each team member to perform at their maximum capability while maintaining absolute operational security. Stevens, whose initial skepticism had evolved into genuine admiration, took point on the most difficult climbing sections. Walsh used her communication skills to coordinate movement while maintaining radio silence. Rodriguez and Mendez provided security and technical support that enabled the team to navigate through challenging terrain. Sarah's leadership during this final phase demonstrated capabilities that exceeded standard military training and suggested potential for advancement to elite military units. Her ability to assess complex tactical situations, develop innovative solutions, and execute plans under extreme pressure impressed even the special operations soldiers who were playing enemy forces. The extraction was completed exactly on schedule, with Sarah's team being the first to reach the pickup point and the only team to complete all assigned objectives without casualties or detection. Their performance exceeded expectations and established new benchmarks for the exercise. More importantly, they had demonstrated that properly led mixed-gender teams could perform at levels that rivaled the most elite military units. Morrison's reaction to this success was complex and conflicted. Professional military standards required him to acknowledge exceptional performance and recommend Sarah for advancement opportunities. But personal convictions and career-long beliefs made it difficult for him to accept what this success might mean for military policies he opposed. General Williams, who had been following the exercise through detailed reports and real-time communications, scheduled an immediate debriefing with all participants. Her questions focused not just on tactical decisions and performance measures, but on team dynamics, leadership effectiveness, and the broader implications for military training and personnel policies. Sarah's responses during the debriefing were professional and thoughtful, focusing on tactical analysis and team development rather than personal achievement. She credited her team members' capabilities and cooperation while acknowledging areas where improvement was possible. Her assessment demonstrated maturity and military thinking that impressed everyone present. But Sarah also understood that this success would create new challenges and expectations that might be even more difficult than the opposition she had already faced. Morrison's hostility had become more sophisticated and potentially more dangerous, and the political implications of her achievements extended far beyond military training into national policy debates. As the debriefing concluded and teams prepared for return to base, Sarah reflected on how much had changed over the past weeks. She had proven that women could excel in the most demanding military roles, but she had also learned that changing institutional cultures required more than individual success. The real battle was just beginning, and victory would require sustained excellence under increasingly intense scrutiny. The return to base after the wilderness exercise marked a turning point that extended far beyond Sarah's personal achievement. Word of her team's exceptional performance had reached Pentagon officials, congressional representatives, and media organizations that were following the integration of women into combat roles. What had begun as a training exercise had evolved into a national case study with implications for military policy and gender equality. Colonel Morrison found himself in an unprecedented situation. His superiors were demanding explanations for Sarah's success that challenged his fundamental arguments against women in combat. General Williams had submitted a detailed report recommending Sarah for accelerated advancement and specialized training opportunities. Military efficiency experts were citing her tactical innovations as examples of adaptive leadership that should be incorporated into standard training protocols. The pressure was affecting Morrison in ways that surprised even his closest associates. Captain Robert Hayes, who had served as Morrison's executive officer for 3 years, noticed changes in the colonel's behavior that suggested deep internal conflict. Morrison's usual confidence had been replaced by defensive reactions and attempts to find alternative explanations for Sarah's achievements. "There has to be something we're missing," Morrison confided to Hayes during a private meeting. "These results don't align with 30 years of evidence about physical and psychological limitations. Either the testing parameters are flawed, or we're seeing an exceptional case that shouldn't influence broader policy decisions." Hayes, who had witnessed Sarah's performance firsthand, found himself in the uncomfortable position of disagreeing with his commanding officer. "Sir, with respect, maybe the evidence is telling us that our assumptions need to be reconsidered. Martinez's success isn't just about individual capability, it's demonstrating different approaches to leadership and tactical thinking that might benefit the entire military." This conversation represented a broader shift that was occurring throughout the training facility. Sarah's achievements had forced many officers and enlisted personnel to reconsider their positions on gender integration. Some, like Hayes, were genuinely impressed by her capabilities and began supporting more inclusive policies. Others remained convinced that her success was anomalous and potentially dangerous to military effectiveness. Sarah herself was struggling with the attention and expectations that her success had generated. She had entered military service with personal goals of proving her capabilities and serving her country. Now she found herself representing broader social and political movements that extended far beyond her individual ambitions. The responsibility was both honor and burden. Media interviews became a regular part of her schedule, with reporters seeking quotes and insights about women's roles in military service. Sarah tried to keep these interactions focused on professional capabilities rather than gender politics, but the questions inevitably centered on her experiences with discrimination and her thoughts about military culture. "I don't want to be seen as a symbol," she told Rodriguez during a private conversation. "I just want to be a good soldier who happens to be female." But every success gets analyzed through the lens of gender politics, and every mistake would be used to argue against integration policies. Rodriguez, who had become Sarah's closest friend and confidant, understood these pressures better than most. "You didn't ask to be a symbol, but you can't escape the reality of what your success means to other women. You're proving that we belong here, and that's bigger than any individual career." The military's response to Sarah's achievements was to fast-track her through advanced training programs that typically required years of preparation. She was selected for the Army's Elite Ranger School, a prestigious program with a notorious failure rate that had only recently been open to women. The selection was both recognition of her capabilities and a challenge to prove that her success could be sustained at the highest levels. Ranger School represented the ultimate test of military capability, combining extreme physical challenges with complex tactical scenarios and psychological pressure designed to eliminate all but the most exceptional candidates. The curriculum included mountain warfare, desert operations, jungle survival, and urban combat simulations that tested every aspect of military skill. Morrison's role in Sarah's Ranger School assignment was complicated. Officially, he supported the recommendation as recognition of exceptional performance. Privately, he hoped that the extreme demands of Ranger training would finally reveal limitations that would validate his opposition to women in combat roles. He believed that Sarah's previous successes had occurred under controlled conditions that didn't replicate the full stress of actual military service. The preparation for Ranger School required Sarah to reach physical and mental conditioning levels that exceeded anything she had previously attempted. She worked with specialized trainers to develop strength and endurance capabilities while maintaining the agility and tactical thinking that had distinguished her performance. The training was exhausting but also exhilarating, as she pushed beyond what she had thought possible. General Williams took a personal interest in Sarah's preparation, providing mentorship that extended beyond standard military channels. Williams understood the pressures that Sarah faced and the importance of her success for broader integration efforts. Their conversations covered not just tactical and physical preparation, but psychological strategies for maintaining focus under intense scrutiny. "The most dangerous enemy you'll face isn't the physical challenges or even the hostile instructors," Williams told her. "It's the voice in your head that tells you that you don't belong there, that you're representing everyone who looks like you, and that failure would validate everyone who doubted your capabilities. You have to learn to compete against yourself and the standards, not against expectations and prejudices." Sarah's arrival at Ranger School created immediate attention from instructors, fellow candidates, and media representatives who had been granted limited access to document this historic participation. She was one of only 3 women in a class of 150 candidates, and the scrutiny was intense from the very first day. The initial physical testing eliminated nearly 20% of candidates within the first week. Sarah not only passed all requirements but exceeded standards in several categories, including navigation, marksmanship, and tactical problem-solving. Her performance was consistent with her previous achievements but occurred under observation by some of the military's most experienced and skeptical instructors. Master Sergeant David Park, the lead instructor for Sarah's class, had trained thousands of soldiers over a 20-year career and had strong opinions about the physical and psychological requirements for elite military service. He had opposed the integration of women into Ranger School but approached Sarah's evaluation with professional objectivity. "Martinez doesn't fit the typical profile of successful Ranger candidates," he confided to his fellow instructors. "She's smaller and physically weaker than most men in the program. But her tactical thinking and leadership capabilities are exceptional, and she's finding ways to overcome physical limitations through superior strategy and preparation." The mountain warfare phase of Ranger School tested candidates' ability to operate in extreme conditions while carrying heavy equipment and completing complex missions. Sarah's smaller size, which critics had identified as a limitation, actually proved advantageous in certain situations. She required fewer calories to maintain energy, could move through tight spaces more easily, and generated less heat signature for thermal detection. More importantly, Sarah's approach to mountain operations demonstrated innovative thinking that impressed instructors and fellow candidates. Instead of trying to match the physical capabilities of larger teammates, she focused on route planning, equipment optimization, and tactical coordination that maximized team effectiveness while minimizing individual limitations. During a particularly challenging exercise that required teams to traverse difficult terrain while carrying wounded team members, Sarah developed a rotation system that distributed physical demands more efficiently than standard procedures. Her innovation allowed her team to complete the mission faster and with less exhaustion than teams that relied on traditional approaches. The desert warfare phase presented different challenges that tested endurance, navigation, and resource management under extreme environmental conditions. Temperatures exceeded 110 degrees during the day and dropped below freezing at night. Water and food supplies were strictly rationed, and candidates had to complete missions while managing severe physical stress. Sarah's performance during desert operations was particularly impressive to instructors who had expected the environmental extremes to expose her limitations. Her superior navigation skills kept her team on course when others became lost. Her resource management prevented dehydration and malnutrition, and her tactical leadership enabled mission completion under conditions that defeated several other teams. Sergeant Park found himself reconsidering his assumptions about female capabilities in extreme environments. "Martinez is demonstrating that success in elite military units depends on much more than pure physical strength," he wrote in his evaluation report. "Her combination of technical skills, tactical thinking, and leadership capability makes her one of the most effective candidates I've evaluated." The jungle warfare phase tested candidates' ability to operate in hot, humid conditions while navigating dense vegetation and conducting reconnaissance missions. The environment was physically and psychologically demanding, with limited visibility, dangerous wildlife, and disease vectors that challenged even experienced soldiers. Sarah's approach to jungle operations drew on survival skills she had learned during civilian wilderness training and tactical concepts from her military education. She demonstrated superior camouflage and concealment techniques, efficient movement through difficult terrain, and threat assessment that kept her team safe while achieving mission objectives. During a complex reconnaissance mission that required gathering intelligence on enemy positions without detection, Sarah's team achieved complete success while several other teams were detected and eliminated from the exercise. Her ability to coordinate team movements, manage noise and visual signatures, and adapt to changing conditions impressed instructors who specialized in special operations training. The final phase of Ranger School was an intensive combat simulation that combined all previous training elements into a comprehensive test of military capability. Candidates were assigned complex missions that required coordination between multiple teams while operating under extreme time pressure and resource constraints. Sarah's role in the final exercise was as team leader for a mission that required her to coordinate reconnaissance, assault, and extraction operations while maintaining communication with higher command authorities. The mission parameters were designed to test her ability to manage complex tactical situations while making decisions that could affect multiple teams and overall mission success. Her performance during the final exercise exceeded expectations and demonstrated leadership capabilities that impressed even Colonel Morrison, who had traveled to observe her evaluation. Sarah successfully coordinated multi-team operations, adapted to unexpected complications, and achieved all mission objectives while maintaining operational security and minimizing casualties. The graduation ceremony for Ranger School was attended by high-ranking military officials, congressional representatives, and media organizations that recognized the historic significance of Sarah's achievement. She was one of only 62 candidates who successfully completed the program, and her performance had been among the top 10% throughout all phases of training. General Williams delivered the graduation address, speaking about the evolution of military service and the importance of recognizing excellence regardless of gender or background. The soldiers graduating today represent the best of military capability and demonstrate that effectiveness comes from skill, dedication, and leadership rather than conformity to traditional expectations. Colonel Morrison watched the ceremony with complex emotions. Sarah's success had definitively proven that women could excel at the highest levels of military service, challenging assumptions that had shaped his entire career. But he was also beginning to recognize that her achievements represented not just individual success but evolution in military thinking that could benefit the entire armed forces. After the ceremony, Morrison approached Sarah privately for a conversation that neither of them had expected. "Martinez, I owe you an apology," he said, his voice carrying the weight of personal transformation. "I allowed my assumptions and prejudices to cloud my judgment about your capabilities and potential contributions to military service." Sarah's response was gracious but direct. "Sir, I understand that change is difficult, especially when it challenges beliefs that have guided a successful career. What matters now is that we focus on building a military that recognizes and develops excellence wherever it's found." Morrison nodded slowly, recognizing the wisdom in her words. "Your success has forced me to reconsider not just policies about women in combat, but broader questions about leadership, tactical thinking, and what makes an effective soldier. You've been a better teacher than you probably realize." This conversation marked the beginning of Morrison's transformation from opponent to advocate for inclusive military policies. Over the following months, he would become one of the most effective voices for integration, using his credibility and experience to convince other skeptics that excellence in military service transcended traditional gender roles. Sarah's achievement at Ranger School opened doors to elite military units and specialized assignments that had never been available to women. She received offers from special operations commands, intelligence agencies, and international military exchange programs. But she also received something equally valuable: the knowledge that she had helped change an institution and opened opportunities for future generations of military women. The impact of Sarah's success extended far beyond military service into broader conversations about capability, opportunity, and social change. Her story became a case study in leadership development, a reference point for policy discussions, and an inspiration for women in various fields who faced institutional barriers to advancement. Years later, when Sarah reflected on her military career and its broader implications, she would remember not just the personal satisfaction of achievement but the responsibility that came with breaking barriers. She had proven that with determination, preparation, and exceptional performance, it was possible to change minds, transform institutions, and create opportunities for others to follow. Colonel Morrison, in his own later reflections, would credit Sarah with teaching him that true military leadership required the wisdom to recognize and develop excellence regardless of its source, and the courage to change course when evidence contradicted cherished assumptions. Her victory had indeed shaken him to his core, but in ways that ultimately made him a better leader and a more effective advocate for military excellence.